Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, cut off my knees and put it into my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
What you know, good and Camp? You're listening to the And Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson, and the Windy City representative, the baddest brother above the Mason-Dixon line, my play cousin, the Right Reverend Christopher Butler. Chris, how you been doing, brother?
I'm doing pretty well. It's a good Wednesday in Chicago. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. You been able to watch the Olympic Games at all?
Yeah, they have been pretty much in the background as we're doing our thing. Watching some interesting sports. My almost 9-year-old, he'll be 9 tomorrow, so happy birthday, Azadi. He put me on handball.
Okay.
So he explained to me the rules and all that stuff, and I kind of got into it. Handball is great, and France has a great team.
That's part of the beauty of the Olympic Games, is that you will watch competitions that you've never watched before. You know what I'm saying? Based on that, Like I wouldn't watch that outside of the Olympics, but whether it's water polo, you said handball, there's a number of them that you might just check out during the Olympic Games in the course of cheering for your team. But let me tell you who stuck out to me during these Olympic Games, because me and my 3 sons have been watching it whenever we get the chance. Number one is Gabby Thomas. I don't know if you saw that 200-meter race that she ran, but she was actually running against a sister who won the 100 meters and just blew her out. Didn't really even have to catch up to her, because obviously the 100-meter is shorter, so I thought the other lady would have got out first, and would have been way ahead. That wasn't the case. I mean, Gabby ran an outstanding race. But also Sydney McLaughlin. She runs the 400 meters. She runs the 400 hurdles. The crazy part is when she's running the 400 hurdles, she runs fast enough to almost qualify in the 400 without hurdles. Amazing. And even more important than that, Sydney is all about the gospel. Anytime she gets a chance to talk about God, anytime she gets a chance and gets interviewed and can throw that in there, she does. So she is a true church folk champ, and it's been an honor to kind of watch her. But one of the things I'd have to say that sticks out to me during these Olympics too is, there are some women's sports that I think are just far more entertaining than men's sports. Mm-hmm. Tennis, I'll put volleyball in there, and then track. Track is, my favorite Olympic sport. But to me, it sticks out even more than the men's track. And I think there's more personalities and more star power on the U.S. women's team than the men's team. Although the men's team is doing very well, I think that's worth mentioning. Any thoughts on that, Chris?
No, I mean, I think that's absolutely the case. I would put ping pong in that category as well. So it's great watching the Olympics. The U.S. We watched a shoot off in archery. So it's incredible. I wish it would have been in Chicago, but
Yeah. And knowing how much work that these athletes put into it, I think that just adds to it. You're putting in a lifetime of work, and to see that come into fruition for a lot of folks is just really cool, man. But we got to get moving. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, even some stuff that just popped up right before we got on the line. But first, let me give a shout out to all our patrons and supporters for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. I say this all the time, but there's not a whole lot of podcasts that are bringing a biblical perspective without the partisan lean and all that stuff, that are really critiquing both sides of the aisle, but all different types of ideologies, even our own. And so we need you. There's not a lot of support for that kind of position. And so we need you guys' help. One way that you can help is you're going to go on patreon.com/churchpolitics. You can give there. If you become a monthly giver, then you will get premium episodes. And so we'll be doing a premium episode after this, and you'll be able to get it if you become a monthly giver. So help us out, become part of the movement. Don't just stand on the sidelines. Do this with us. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like and subscribe. All right, guys, a lot to talk about. So grab your Bible, get your mind right and prepare to think, not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but to think like a Christian. And I'm going to start with some scripture. We can go to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Chris, I think that's something that everybody needs to be thinking about as we go through the anxiety of a very consequential presidential election. We should engage. We should engage and know that this is a big deal, that the stakes are high, but we should also engage with the perspective of knowing that God is in control and he will be on the throne, even if our, preferred candidate does not win in November. We've been going all around the country. We were just in Akron, Ohio, basically saying the same thing and really going through our 10 disciplines when it comes to this election. If you haven't heard of the Civic Revival 10 disciplines, you need to go on our website and check it out, because I think it will help you get through this time in the election. But let's get to some election updates, Chris. One of the biggest updates that I have is that Vice President Kamala Harris has chosen a running mate. And if I'm going to be honest, Chris, it's really not someone that I had high on the short list 2 weeks ago. This is a person who seemed to have surged maybe 48 hours before the decision was made. You and I, even in the episode that we did in Akron, thought it was going to be Shapiro. I mean, all signs looked like Shapiro was going to be the guy that she chose. He was polished. He was well-spoken, doing very good in his interviews. And not only that, he's from Pennsylvania. He's the governor of Pennsylvania. So he came pretty much with 19 electoral votes. So we thought it was, was a shoo-in at some point. But the X factor may have been, Chris, that the left was very aggressive in saying that they did not want Shapiro. They said some were saying that he was too close to corporate power. Others were saying that his views on Israel were unacceptable, and so on and so on. And that may have been what pushed him out of there. And so it will not be Shapiro. It will be the governor of Minnesota, who is our brother Walz. All right. This is going to be interesting, Chris, because, again, he was in play. He was talking about it. Tim Walz was part of the VP search in the conversation, but he just wasn't at the top of it. So let's learn a little bit about who our brother Tim Walz is. All right. He is a former teacher. He's a former football coach. And so he really kind of has and I said this on the Civic Update this week, kind of a plain spoken, folksy appeal that kind of makes up from some of the things that Kamala doesn't have, right? Just that common touch, being able to speak to the working class and all those things, very important. And he may be able to sew up some of those weaknesses that she has. So in my estimation, Chris, I'm going to hand it to you in a second. I think this does two things. I think it unites the party because they probably didn't want the left, Kamala's, I would say, more moderate, although she kind of goes back and forth. They wanted it. This was all the left could ask for, Chris. I don't know if they could have asked for somebody that fit them better. And many of them explicitly asked for Walz. So that unites the party, kind of brings the two sides together, brings a little bit more energy inside the party. And it shows that I think they're making a play for the Rust Belt, Chris. Places like Arizona and Georgia. Maybe not giving up on Pennsylvania, but saying we don't necessarily need Pennsylvania. If we can get Georgia and we can get Arizona, that makes a big difference. But Chris, what are your thoughts on this VP pick?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly surprising, especially after the so-called leak, which I guess now we can say was not a leak, or maybe it was part of, that also could have been part of getting from Shapiro to Walz. We'll see. As more reporting is done on the process of making the pick, I think some of that will come out. But yeah, I think that this is a little bit different. It does probably serve to unite the party, or at least to keep the left with Kamala, which is definitely something she would need to win this race. And I think like you, this might be something of a confidence pick, where you see them, the Harris campaign's in that they can bring those kind of those Sunbelt states to go get Georgia, right? And I think part of that is it may have been part of the process, and we're going to talk about this more in the next block. But you watch your opponent go to Georgia, and his approach to winning the state of Georgia is to attack the very popular governor of the state. It's like, if that's how you're going to play Georgia, maybe we can bring Georgia into play. If we get somebody who really is a favorite of labor, maybe we can bring Nevada back into play. So I think that there's a little bit of vibrato, frankly, reflected in this pick. And we'll see how that goes. I mean, I still think part of me says this goes against the fundamentals. And we'll see, how it shakes out. But you leave Pennsylvania on the table. And if you do lose Pennsylvania, then you got to go get Georgia. You got to go get Nevada, and probably Arizona. And so, we'll see how it goes. But I don't, I think I'm always skeptical of going against the fundamentals, but also the whole world is upside down a little bit. So
it is. It's very upside down. And when you talk about Walz now, you're getting as progressive of a candidate that you're going to get in this type of position. I don't know if there's a more progressive governor in the nation, right? And so that's just not just progressive on social issues, but very progressive when it comes to fiscal issues as well. So when it comes to some of the policies that he's pushed and success that he's had in Minnesota, free school meals, which, that's something that we can agree with, especially for poor kids who are really suffering. No kid should have to go to school and not eat. Paid family leave. Too many Americans just do not get enough leave when, after they have a baby and all those things. That's something that I think this country can do if we have sound policy around it. And he has been able to do that in Minnesota. And those are things I agree with. Now, there's some other things I wouldn't agree with. Okay. He codifies abortion. And then, when it comes to abortion and trans issues, he's as far left as you can go. I haven't seen him push back on any of this stuff. You get the things that, some conservatives are using, like he put tampons in boys' bathrooms, which I don't get that. And then he signs this trans refuge bill. Now, Chris, this trans refuge bill allows kids to travel to Minnesota to get trans surgeries. But here's the kicker. They can travel if they can't get it in their state or whatever, they can travel to Minnesota, get a trans surgery without parental consent.
Yeah.
So you're basically telling me that my 13-year-old, whether, they're going through something or whatever's happening, can leave home, go to Minnesota, get a trans surgery without the parent knowing or consenting. And then in the bill is also it can deny parents custody if they refuse to consent.
Yeah.
As we're excited about the vibes and this and that, and we know there's plenty of stuff that we can criticize Trump for, and we do, we got to pay attention to stuff like this as well. And it doesn't necessarily mean, for those of you that want to vote for Harrison and Walz, that's your choice. But especially for pastors and faith leaders, this is something you need to push back against. These are the type of things that, I'll support you, but this type of policy is not okay. It's not something that I agree with, because if something were to happen, something like that were to happen to somebody in your congregation who had a kid who was going through a lot or whatever could be happening, I don't think you would want to see that. I don't think that's something you would want to support. Chris, any thoughts just on these? On the one end, him being fiscally progressive, which some of the stuff I can agree with. You may agree with more of it, but then him also being very, very socially progressive, almost to the point that it doesn't even connect with the group that they may be using him to reach. Like, I don't know that Middle America is going to be with him on those issues, but I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly done some things on fiscal policy that I can agree with. but he has done some things on social issues that you have talked about already. His record also on restricting faith institutions, especially Christian institutions inside of the state. This is not a guy who's a fighter for religious freedom, and that's something else that we have to be cognizant of in the church community. And so I think that these are things that we have to talk about. I will say my Minnesota friends that I talked to yesterday, I mean, they love the guy. And I think the part of the reason for that is in order for any of these things to be salient, somebody's got to actually take him to task on these things. And I worry that there's not a real presence in the Trump campaign, which we will talk about. But to really come out and say, hey, paid family leave is important for families, and we can do that without, taking people's children away because they don't want to do a transition surgery for a minor. We can do, paid lunch for kids across the state, especially making sure that poor kids eat lunch when they go to school without stripping religious institutions and religious schools of their particular freedoms to believe what they want to believe and to practice that belief and fold it into their sort of institutional practice. We can do these things without restricting freedom. There's an argument to be made there, but if nobody makes the argument, then the election does go much more on vibes and affect, which on those points, I think the Walz pick is certainly a winner. And the question is who's going to actually take the campaign to task on some of these issues that are important. And like you said, I would hope that at least at the grassroots level, the pulpit will be one of those places where all of these things can be discussed. We can celebrate the things that are good, and we can critique and question those things that are not so helpful.
And this is really just about being a serious citizen, being a serious coalition. If I'm a serious coalition, I don't just jump. I don't know too many groups that are serious, that are a little more sophisticated, that jump on a side and don't have demands and don't put some conditions on that and don't put some boundaries. And this is a place where you could take boundaries. And look, this isn't even about this isn't necessarily even about the larger LGBTQ issue. I would love to see a poll on how many Americans think it's okay to give a 13, 14-year-old a trans surgery without the consent of their parents, and then to take the kid away if the parent doesn't consent. Yeah. I don't think those numbers are going to be very high, right? So there's people who are affirming, not affirming, who I think would say that's too far. But yet there's a lot of celebration, but we're not considering this. There's another issue that I'm not sure a lot of people are considering either, which is what we've been talking about for a while. The Biden administration has done a pretty good job on not attacking corporations for no reason or just saying we want to get rid of all corporations. I think corporations can do and have done a lot of work here. A lot of us work for corporations, right? We wouldn't have a job without them. But I think they have been enforcing the law. They've been enforcing antitrust law that hadn't been enforced by Bush, Clinton, Bush, right? Obama, Trump, not as much as they're doing now. And now he's actually enforcing the law. But we just got an update. And we've been wondering what Harris was going to do on this because she is fairly close with Wall Street and has a lot of those connections. It's been said that LinkedIn's founder and others have been pushing her to get rid of Lena Khan, who we've talked a lot about, who's been leading kind of this push to make sure that corporations are being fair to consumers. And when asked about it, a campaign surrogate who is Governor Wes Moore, when asked if they would be moving away from Biden's policies, and this just happened, I just saw it, I think he was on CNBC, he said basically, yes, we'll be moving away from those policies to be more corporate friendly. That that's something people should be talking about. That's a big policy shift that I think, again, pushes Democrats away from the working class, away from the black working class, the white working class, and others, and closer to that elite space where they've been, moving towards for a while. Is everyone who's going all in for Kamala aware of this, and are they okay with it? Now, again, this doesn't mean, hey, she did this one thing, now you have to vote for Trump. That's not what we're saying. But somebody should be saying something about it. Somebody on these, meetings where we're getting all these affinity groups together should be like, hey, how are we going to push back on this particular thing? Because we are serious voters, we're serious citizens, and we don't just jump on board. We come with an agenda and with certain boundaries. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, this is one of the most serious, sort of policy decisions I think that the next president is going to make. What to do with those folks. And again, we're going to have another opportunity to talk about this in a later block. But what are you going to do with those individuals like Lena Khan, like Jonathan Cantor, Genzer at SEC? Like, what are you going to do with those folks? Because they have been making progress on this issue of sort of just rebalancing the economy. Because this is the other thing that I think is important to point out. If I were designing messaging in this campaign, I would be pointing out that this was not new law, right? Like, this is just enforcing existing law. And the fact that you see Wes Moore come out and just outrightly say, we're going to move away from this policy, should be really alarming. Because when you think about the things that the President of the United States is going to do that's going to have real impact on the day-to-day life of a citizen in the United States, right? Like, even if you have somebody who's like super radical on transgender stuff, it's really hard to imagine getting a piece of legislation through the Congress that makes, the whole United States the kind of, refuge, trans refuge or whatever they call it in Minnesota. But the president's going to choose who leads the SEC. The president's going to appoint people at the DOJ. The president's going to appoint a National Labor Relations Board. And so if you see somebody who's coming out and telling you that they are going to move away from these policies that are pro-worker, pro-middle class, moving in the right direction to rebalance our economy, that should be a real alarm. And as you have said, doesn't mean that you can't support the person, but certainly you need to be asking a question. How are you going to do this? And I think at this point you need organized pushback, because you can clearly see that there's organized effort from the donor class to make sure that we do move away from enforcing antitrust laws, being more reasonable and objective on labor issues, prosecuting violations of antitrust law. And if that side is organized and the more pro-worker, pro-people side is not organized, I think I can predict who's going to win that battle.
And here's and you know what, Chris? I want people to see it for themselves, because I don't want them just to use our interpretation of what Governor Moore just said. Go ahead, Slewfoot, and roll the clip of CNBC and Governor Wes Moore.
There have been a lot of calls from the donor class specifically on Harris to potentially move away, if you will, from Lena Khan, for example, and to try to have a different type of regulatory regime that might be more open to transactions and deal making and other things like that. Do you think that we are going to hear about a shift in terms of her regulatory views, and do they really differ from President Biden?
I think we will, and I think we have to. And I think, making sure that we have a regulatory body that's able to have and influence free markets that is able to have and influence real capital and liquidity flow, making sure that we are both supporting our small businesses and making it easier for small businesses to be able to grow, and also making it easier for our large industries to be able to compete within our states and within this country, is something that I think is going to be important. And I think it is important for people to remember, too, that as the vice president is thinking about a future-facing administration, that there are going to be different dynamics that are going to require different philosophies. There will be different socio-political and just political dynamics that is going to require a different set of a vision, a different lens and a different vision. And I think that's what the vice president is going to be able to offer. This is not just going to be how are we speaking about the work of the Biden-Harris administration. This is going to be about what is going to be the impact and the hope of the Harris-Walz administration, which I do think will have some differences with what we're seeing within the Biden-Harris administration.
Well, guys, you see it for yourself. That's what's being said. It's interesting that they get Walz, who is very progressive on economic issues, but then the day after they make this announcement through a very popular surrogate. Now, I like Westmore. I think, you know what I'm saying? As a person, he seems like a cool guy. You know, he seems like energetic. I like what he stands for. They bring him out to make this announcement, basically saying we're going along with the donors. You know, this is going to test how serious we are. Again, this is about a process and making sure that people are Here, let me back up a little bit. And I don't want to go on a huge rant, Chris. So there are people hurting in America. There are people who can't afford housing. They can't afford food. They can't get a job that allows them to take care of their families. One group that's not hurting is LinkedIn, the Googles. These folks are not hurting. They've been making huge profits, not necessarily investing it back into the people or anything like that. They're not hurting. If we're going to vote just on vibes and identity and not push back even during the campaign, what is that saying about how serious we are at this moment? You've got to, if you're committed to voting for, that's fine. You've got to push back on stuff like this stuff. Otherwise, what are you voting? Are we just voting for the symbolism of it? For the first of it? If the first time donors push on her to do something, she's just going to automatically do it, which is really the knock on her, right? That she doesn't have strong convictions when it comes to policy. So people worry about what direction she'll get pushed in. And to go with Walz and then make an announcement like this, it's discouraging. But go ahead, Chris, you can take us out.
Yeah, I would urge us again, like anybody who is, if you're committed to Kamala Harris, it should not be enough to have it where, I'm happy because the person who's taken away the rights and ability of workers to come together and have a collective voice in their workplace is a Black woman instead of, somebody else, or the person who's shutting down the enforcement of antitrust laws and allowing corporations to just run amok. She's a Black woman, so that should be okay. Or, we're just going to let, Wall Street do whatever they want to do, avoid, evade, any kind of accountability. But it's a Black woman doing it, so I'm good with that. I can't see how that is a morally right position to take.
Yeah.
And so this is not about one candidate over the other. This is saying whoever you support, or even if you're not supporting either one of these candidates, these issues that will impact how people live, whether you get access to housing, the quality and compensation for the job that you do, like these real everyday things, those things should be top of mind for us, and we should be discussing them with anybody who wants to be president of the United States.
Yeah, and we'll talk about it in the next segment. No reason to believe that Trump is going to do better on this, right?
Right.
So we have to factor that in. That's not the point, though. It's not just, he'll do worse. It's like, nah, but this is bad for the people. So we could get the person that we want, right? And then still not get the policy that's helping people. Let's try to get both, regardless of who you're voting for. We will be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, cut off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
And we are back on the Church Politics Podcast. This has been an interesting campaign, Chris, and we're seeing some movement in regard to the polls. According to statistician and data journalist Nate Silver, Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, is beating Trump in this election right now in his forecast by 1.4 points. She's at 45.5 and he's at 44.1. That's still a toss-up, but I think we have to say, Chris, that is a major shift since Biden left the race. And as I said before, there has been a lot of energy going towards Kamala. There's not that much time left. And I can't say that the Trump campaign is on the ropes necessarily because it's still so close. But it's definitely on its heels. I would have thought that they would have been out with more attacks and, first of all, they got to define themselves. So I don't know that the Trump campaign has defined itself at all, other than it wasn't Biden and Biden is old. Haven't seen them come out and really define this is what we're about. Also, haven't seen them do a good job outside of some insults here or there. Haven't seen them do a good job of trying to define the Harris campaign. Those efforts have been pretty weak. So it seems like they were just caught off guard. And I've said this before, by the fact that Biden wasn't going to be that wasn't going to be their opponent. Also, they've had some major fumbles. You have the cat lady comments, which I talk about on the Civic Update. And now, Chris, I don't know if you saw it or not, Trump picked a fight with Governor Brian Kemp in a state. Kemp is the governor of Georgia. Kemp is a very popular governor of Georgia. Why in the world would you pick a fight with another Republican in a state that you need to win? It seems to me like he's just completely out of sorts. If they have any sense, what they would do was come out with an economic agenda, lay the agenda and all that stuff out there, beat Harris to the punch, because she hasn't done any of that stuff either. I just don't see their footing. And one thing I know from running campaigns, Chris, is that once you get off on the wrong foot, once you start going in the wrong direction, it's hard to get back on. You have to have some really strong leadership to get back going in the right direction. And I'm not sure that Trump is capable of that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a former campaign professional, I kind of feel sorry for some of the Trump campaign. I'm reminded of one of my favorite proverbs is Proverbs 16:32, and I forget what translation it is, but it says, "Better to be patient than a warrior, and better to have self-control than to take a city." And what I see in the Trump campaign is a smart, sharp, disciplined campaign with a terrible candidate. Because I've watched some of the Trump ads. I think some of them are really strong. I wrote down on the night of the Trump speech at the RNC, and I'm glad I had this in my notes because it reminded me of how it was to experience that in real time. So early in the speech, when he's doing the speech that the speechwriters wrote, that the campaign put together, he has this line, "We are one people, one glorious nation under God. So with American pride swelling in our hearts and American courage stirring in our souls, we will make America strong again. We'll make America safe again. We'll make America prosperous again. And we'll make America great again." It's like, if that was the end of the speech, and it felt like to me that was supposed to be like the climax of the speech. And if he closes there, that speech is a home run, and people are like with Trump. And now there's a message, because it is about like you've moved from a marriage to a slightly more hopeful disposition, where it's like, we got to bring back American strength and courage and prosperity, and I'm the guy to bring that back. And it's slightly more positive. Like, it's still Trumpian, right? But it's a slightly more positive disposition, and he has just not been able to stay there. And I kind of feel bad for the Trump campaign folks, because now with Walz, like, you got a guy who immediately, when he came out for his speech, he talked about joy. He's got a daughter named Hope, and I think he's got a much better sense of where this campaign needs to be than Donald Trump as a candidate. So it sucks to be a Trump campaign staffer right now, I think.
Yeah. And I wonder, I do wonder what the dynamics like between Trump and Vance right now. Vance didn't get off to a very good start. And, Trump is known for throwing folks on the bus and kind of putting it off on them. It's hard for me to imagine that he's been super supportive of somebody who he may see as, being a liability up until this point. I think as far as how he speaks and the messaging that he can bring, that Vance can be an asset just based on his ability to debate and all that, but he hasn't been. And so it'd be interesting to know what that dynamic is like, what that back and forth is like right now, because Trump's just not known for having a whole lot of grace for people who he could see as putting him in a bad situation. And here's the other thing. A lot of his appeal the first time was a populist message. That populist message is not there right now. You're just not hearing it. And then you bring a Walz in, which was a smart, in this regard, maybe a smart move for Kamala. Maybe you take that away from him. Now, it's hard to do with the announcement that we just made, but are people going to report on it? Are people going to be listening and paying attention to what's going on? But the Trump campaign, it almost feels like he thought he could get by just with doing whatever he wanted to do. Once he got a new candidate, he's just out of sorts. And, when a candidate kind of loses it on the trail, it's very difficult to get them back on track. It's very difficult. Anything else?
No, I think it's tough. We'll see in the next few days, because, the Democrats, they did the Walz announcement. Now they're going to go into their convention, which will probably be as peaceful as it can, because they will have Walz on there, which I think will tamp down a lot of some of like the left protest activity. And I think this is a very important stretch. Like, these next, 10, 15 days for the Trump campaign are going to be really important. And, I say for the Trump campaign, but it's really for Donald Trump, if he's going to be able to turn it around.
Yeah. And you make a good point. I meant to say that you make a very good point about the protests, because the protests at the DNC could have been a huge spectacle, and still could be. But the Walz choice may calm that down a little bit. I didn't even process that at first. But that could have been part of this. Say, hey, man, we don't need this outrage, because that could really, you're riding high right now. Yeah. Some serious protests where an officer or somebody else makes the wrong decision could take all that away. I'm going to be watching, though, to see how these progressive influencers respond to what we just heard. That's going to be interesting. We will be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, got off my knees and put it into my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
We are back on the Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney and Reverend Christopher Butler. Chris, let me ask you a question, man. In the past 5 years, can you name me which search engines you have used in the past 5 years?
Google.
Are there any others that you might have used?
YouTube, which is owned by Google. Yeah, I think that's it.
I'm like you, Chris. I can't think of another search engine I've used in the last it's probably more than 5. It might be closer to a decade.
Yeah, people in our age group can remember, like, when it was competition, when you had Yahoo and
Right.
Ask Jeeves and all that.
Right. What was the one, Bing or something like that?
Bing, yes.
I think Bing might have been the last one I used. I haven't used one since then. So the reason I asked that, Chris, is because on Monday, a judge said that the case, a judge said that basically Google illegally stopping other people from competing with them, right? They were crushing their competition. Google has 89% share of the market for general search services. 89%. When you're talking about,
I think the only thing shocking about that is, like, I'm surprised there's only 89%.
Well, listen to this. When you talk about mobile devices, it's 94.9% of the market. All right. So basically, this is antitrust. This is what we were talking about before. The government brought a case against them, and the judge said, yes, you have a monopoly. Google, basically, the judge said that Google illegally exploited its dominance to crush its competition and stifle innovation. The monopoly enabled Google to charge advertisers artificially high prices without investing in improving the technology. That hurts consumers. Just to go back a little bit, guys, part of the value of capitalism is the competition that brings innovation. Monopolies actually hurt capitalism because they don't allow for that competition. Somebody pushes aside their competition, it's just them. So now they don't have to make their product better, and they can charge you whatever they want because there's no competition, right? This is what Google has done. Basically, Google has gone to AT&T, all these mobile phone folks, and said, hey, make us your default. It's gone to all these tech folks and say, hey, when you create something, a gadget or whatever, make Google your default. But in doing that, and it did it so much, it spent like $26 billion doing that. It made it so no other search engine could get into the market. Guess what, guys? That's against the law. That hurts consumers, that hurts capitalism, that hurts innovation. So they haven't got more innovative. Their searches haven't got better, but they can charge advertisers more. And there's no competition. There's nobody else that you can really go to get into the market. All right. The Associated Press, Chris, called this decision a seismic decision that could shake up the internet and hobble one of the world's best known companies. Chris, what's your take on this decision against Google?
Yeah, I mean, I would just, I just jot it down, say it again for the people in the back, because you said it accurately. Monopolies hurt capitalism, right? It's not just monopolies are bad for, progressives or, economic liberals or anything like that. Monopoly is bad for capitalism. It hobbles innovation, which is that is, I think, the brilliance of capitalism, is its ability to unlock innovation, which is why these things are against the law, right? Like, no new laws were passed in order for this to come about. The thing that was different is that you had Jonathan Cantor at the DOJ willing to bring a case, right? Like, this case could have been brought at least under the previous two administrations, if not earlier than that. You just had a person in the position who was willing to enforce the existing law, which is why this has to be an important question I'm thinking about as we talked about when we're looking at this next presidential election, because the only thing that changed is you had a person at the DOJ who's willing to bring the case.
Right. And again, guys, I know we're doing a little bit of education here. This is not about, this is not a populist, just go attack the corporations are the bad guys, go attack the bad guys. No. When a corporation has a monopoly, it's not only bad for consumers, it's bad for small businesses. It's bad for small businesses who are trying to advertise and get the word out, because now they're being charged crazy amounts because there's no competition. Not only that, it allows these big corporations just to push them out the market if they are trying to get into the same market. So, what Wes Moore was kind of saying about, we want to open things up for small businesses, not enforcing antitrust law doesn't do that. It hurts small businesses. It hurts large businesses that just aren't as large, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's not good for anybody except the businesses that are doing it. And even Adam Smith, even the father of capitalism, understood that. You don't just want one group running a whole market. Yeah. And well, we're not gonna go into. We covered it again. I'm not gonna go another rant, Chris. I promise. Anything else to add to that, Chris?
No, I mean, I just think that this is an important decision, and I will remind people again, I won't rant on it, but I will remind us again that this is just so important. And it's not a new law. There were no new laws passed, no new policies, no new anything, just a person in the position willing to enforce the law.
There you go, just enforcing the law, not an expansion. It has to go. The executive branch brings the case. It has to go through the judicial branch. This is not one side just being tyrannical and tearing things down. The antitrust law had to go through the legislature, right? It's there. It's being applied in ways that they were neglectful of applying before. And now you see donors pushing back and you see all these issues. And if you think our economy is going to get better without making sure that we have a competitive, innovative market, you got something else coming. All right, guys. Well, as always, Chris, it is a pleasure to be on here with you, man. I think we had a really good conversation. My main message, Chris, to the people is whoever you vote for, focus on policy. And if you're part of a coalition supporting a particular candidate, make sure that you speak up and don't just let them do whatever they want and give them unconditional support, because neither of these candidates, no candidate I've ever met, has earned that type of trust and has earned that type of leeway to do whatever they want. That's not democratic. That's not serious citizenship. That's not a serious coalition who represents people who are actually hurting today. All right, Ann Camp, there's a cross that neither political conservatism nor progressivism is fit to bear. There's a civic hearing in need of faithful witnesses who love social justice and won't surrender the truth to be loved by the world. Politic with the boldness and compassion of Jesus Christ. Until next time, Ann Camp. Well, holla at you.
Dear Lord, dear Lord, pay for my sins, Lord. I'm black as heaven. Amen.